we made it to the last speaker, Joji Cariño, who could not be with us today in person due to the same issue that Maria mentioned, and that's delays with visa processing. But we do have her through Zoom, and we are very happy. Joji Cariño is an Ibaloi-Igorot from the Philippines, has been a lifelong advocate for indigenous people's rights. Community-based monitoring and information systems is the current focus of her work, serving as convener of the Indigenous Navigator consortium, which monitors implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the SDGs, and outcomes of the World Conference of Indigenous Peoples. Joji is also co-lead author of the Local Biodiversity Outlooks, the contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities to the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020, and to the Renewal of Natures and Cultures. She is Senior Policy Advisor with the Forest Peoples Program in the UK and convener of a global network of centers of distinction on indigenous and local knowledge. Joji.
Thanks very much, everyone. I want to sincerely thank Jeobon for inviting me to speak today. I consider this invitation an important milestone in celebrating cultural diversity, the breadth and creative richness of humanity's cultural intelligence, as we strive today to work with nature's abundance and intelligence, what today we call biological diversity. It's unfortunate that due to visa problems, I'm meeting you online rather than face-to-face, which has been the manner historically of people getting to know and understand each other. It would have been great to meet you all in person. Allow me now to reflect on my personal experience as an advocate for indigenous people's rights, to illustrate how far indigenous and local knowledges have moved from their colonized and marginalized status towards growing respect as distinct systems of knowledge and ways of being, vital for contemporary solutions to multiple crises in our economic and political systems and social ecological futures. Let us acknowledge together the 1982 to 27 processes under the Human Rights Council, leading to the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The 1992 to 2023 processes under the Rio Conventions, with a focus on the recent adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including the recognition of the outsized contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, historically. Let's also acknowledge the 2014 to 2023 processes under the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, including indigenous and local knowledge in its conceptual framework, operational principles, and functions. The proactive mechanisms adopted by IPBES for the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities have surely contributed to their highly acclaimed global assessments and other products. Also, needing attention is the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in UNESCO's recently adopted recommendation on open science. All of these political gains provide the backdrop for the transformations taking place in the relationship between sciences and indigenous and local knowledge systems. Through my talk, I wish to push on the partly opening doors between the ways and institutions of science and those of indigenous peoples and local communities, and more specifically, between Jeobon and community-based monitoring and information systems. I wish to make a call out to Indigenous scholars and also who are present here, and also to their teachers, supporters, and collaborators. Let us use this conference as an opportunity to get together for exchanges leading to potential future initiatives. The focus of GeoBond's conference is on monitoring the vast but rapidly diminishing state of biological diversity to inform better policies, strategies, and action plans at multiple scales. Like yourselves as scientists, Indigenous peoples are directly monitoring the state of our lands, waters, territories, and resources vis-a-vis underlying drivers and direct threats, whilst also elaborating approaches to solve ongoing and emerging problems within specific contexts of unequal power and opportunities. Generating robust data and information combined with grounded analysis and wisdom is central to realizing Indigenous peoples' self-determination and guiding our own local governance and decision-making about development with culture and identity. I therefore wish to highlight some ongoing initiatives by Indigenous peoples employing community-based monitoring and information systems to link up our data, information, and knowledge systems from local to national, regional, and global scales. And I'll be sharing with you a few slides. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you see my slides now? Okay. We have set up the IIFB Working Group on Indicators. This is a network of organizations who want to contribute to the global overview and understanding of Indigenous people's situation based on concrete research at local, national, and international scale. This was actually created to inform the biodiversity 10 target, which was then trying to identify traditional knowledge indicators. And among our early activities were regional and thematic workshops in collaboration with the UN Permanent Forum Secretariat and the CBD Secretariat to generate possible indicators on Indigenous people's well-being as well as for the CBD.
Joji, sorry to interrupt you. If you have slides, we do not see them.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Close your share screen and share again, please.
Oh dear.
Okay.
Do you see it? Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I was talking about the activities of the IIFB Working Group on Indicators, which started in 2006 in order to identify possible indicators on traditional knowledge under the 2010 biodiversity target. Wait a minute. Yes. Among our first activities, we're collaborating with the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and the Secretariat of Biodiversity to identify indicators at that time for the MDGs, but also for the CBD. This culminated in an international expert seminar, the full report of which went to the CBD, and other products like a resource book on indicators relevant for indigenous peoples. We held a number of technical workshops, and we also pilot tested these indicators in the Philippines. So that expert seminar led to the adoption of the CBD indicators on traditional knowledge, which includes status and trends on biological diversity, status and trends in the practice of traditional occupations, status and trends in land use change and land tenure in the traditional territories of indigenous and local communities, and trends in which traditional knowledge and practices are respected through their full integration, safeguards, and the full and effective participation in national implementation of the strategic plan. So this was the resource book that collected the full range of information coming out of that process. And interestingly, despite the different regions and different groups discussing this, there were these core domains and themes for indigenous peoples' well-being. And I won't go through that, but that showed us that there were common, despite diversity, there were common underlying issues and domains that were being asked for monitoring. So those early initiatives have matured into two initiatives that I'll talk about, one of which is the Indigenous Navigator, which is it's led by a consortium of indigenous peoples organizations and global supporters. And this is really data by and for indigenous peoples, because we developed the tools and the surveys together that are now being used in different countries. So the Indigenous Navigator provides a framework and a set of tools for indigenous peoples to systematically monitor the level of recognition and implementation of their rights. So the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which embodies core human rights conventions as they pertain to indigenous peoples. Also the essential aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals and the outcomes of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, wherein governments after 10 years agreed on what priorities and actions to take together with indigenous peoples. I want to point out that the traditional knowledge indicators of the CBD have been embedded in the monitoring that is being carried out in the Indigenous Navigator. And since the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, a new module will be developed under the Indigenous Navigator, which will track key goals and targets that indigenous peoples are wanting to monitor under that framework. So it uses a human rights-based approach to indicators, which means we follow structural process and outcome indicators, right? And yeah, this is just some of the guidance on how the Indigenous Navigator is being used, the collection of disaggregated data, the use of outcome indicators to actually assess progress on the ground. So now the Indigenous Navigator is being pursued, is being used in 28 countries and has already generated more than 300 reports from communities that are using these tools. And you can get all of this data from the online portal, because the online portal is also available for use. The second initiative which has borne fruit is Local Biodiversity Outlooks. Upon noticing that GBO3 did not have great coverage for indigenous peoples, the IIFB decided to produce Local Biodiversity Outlooks. And after its first edition that came out at COP13 in Mexico, the parties welcomed a second edition of Local Biodiversity Outlooks. And so this second edition was actually launched together with GBO5 because they are seen as complementary reports. So the contents of LBO follows the key sections of GBO, but we have key monitoring of all of the targets under the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity and the Aichi Biodiversity targets. So here is the map of where all of the case studies from indigenous and local community authors that are contained in LBO. But if you go to our online website, this might be interesting for Geobon. We also track the case studies through ecosystems and also by themes. So you don't just read the case studies as they are presented following the targets. You can also track them using other variables. We had some key messages. I'll keep this short. But there was clearly in the past decade neglect and underreporting on traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use. And only 10% of parties were engaging IPLCs in the planning of NBSAPs, right? Also, the nature and culture links are not well developed in the strategies, and overcoming the dualism, separation, and imbalances in the relationships of humans and nature is actually central to addressing the biodiversity crisis. And sustained interactions and partnerships between sciences and indigenous and local systems, inclusive of women, men, elders, and youth, are actually enriching contemporary problem solving with holism and reciprocity. And the final message were the key transitions that we see necessary to move to a good implementation of our new framework, that is a transition in land to secure land rights and customary tenure of indigenous peoples and local communities, food, revitalizing indigenous and local sustainable food systems, culture, recognizing and respecting diverse ways of knowing and being, governance, inclusive decision-making and self-determined development, economy, sustainable use of resources and the flourishing of diverse local economies, not just globalization, and finally, rewarding effective indigenous solutions and stop financing destruction. I'm going to close by citing one of the big challenges for indigenous peoples identified by the UN Statistics Division, which is this work collecting data on indigenous peoples is actually groundbreaking work. That data collection and disaggregation concerning indigenous peoples pose unique challenges in terms of both developing data for global comparative purposes, but of developing data that is really useful at the micro level for indigenous peoples. And here, they have identified insufficient resources and weak political commitment as factors preventing the full use of community-based monitoring and information systems to fully fill the information gaps that are present in many information systems today. So my final slide is a potential challenge to GEOBON. How can GEOBON best support and complement community-based monitoring and information systems? And should it be a community-based bond, or should it be to integrate this into all the existing and developing national, regional, and thematic bonds, or both? But these options will be explored in the upcoming panel on CBMIS, which will also be taking place soon. Thank you very much for your attention.